We continue with verses 24 through 35. When John's messengers had gone, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who put on fine clothing and live in luxury are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, "See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you." I tell you, among those born of women, no one is greater than John. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. And all the people who heard this, including the tax collectors, acknowledged the justice of God, having been baptized with John's baptism. But the Pharisees and the experts in the law, not having been baptized by him, rejected God's purpose for themselves. To what then will I compare the people of this generation? And what are they like? They are like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to one another. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We wailed, and you did not weep. For John the Baptist has come, eating no bread and drinking no wine, and you say, he has a demon. The Son of Man has come eating and drinking, and you say, look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Nevertheless, wisdom is vindicated by all her children. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We're continuing our journey through the Gospel of Luke as part of following the narrative lectionary. There's some interesting stuff going on in today's passage. Some of it's a little confusing. So let's just dive on in and see if we can get some clarity. When we left off last week, Jesus had just performed a long-distance, no-contact healing of a slave of a Roman centurion, and he followed that up with raising from the dead the son of a widow in a little town called Nain. And this is attracting attention. The word is getting out. People are talking. Meanwhile, John the Baptist is in prison, as we learned way back in Luke chapter 3. Herod had put him there, since John had not been shy about calling Herod out for marrying his half-brother's wife, which was against Jewish law. Well, apparently some of John's disciples have somehow managed to keep John informed during his captivity. And now John wants to know, is Jesus the one that John has spent his whole life preparing for and preaching about? The reason John has lived with single-minded purpose in the desert, denying himself even the ordinary pleasures of bread and wine, and surely also a home and a family. Now, why would John, of all people, need to ask that? John the Baptist, didn't we just hear during Advent the story of how Mary, just days after the angel Gabriel makes his announcement to her, after that visit, she hurries to visit her relative Elizabeth, who is in her 6th month of pregnancy with John. And didn't Luke's gospel tell us that when Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the child in her womb leaped for joy? Because John already recognizes the Messiah, and already he is preparing the way. If he recognized Jesus before either one of them was born. Why not now? Didn't Elizabeth and Mary ever get the boys together for a play date? Wouldn't they have, gone to each other's bar mitzvahs or something like that? Surely their paths had crossed before now. Surely their parents had told them something about each other along the way. John asks this question because even though Jesus is healing people on a scale the world has never seen, Jesus was not making any progress at all as far as overthrowing the Roman government and setting up his own kingdom. If Jesus was the Messiah, then why is he, John, still locked up? Even John the Baptist expected a different kind of Messiah than Jesus turned out to be. There are a couple of reasons Jesus responds to John's disciples the way he does. He's not trying to be rude. He has tremendous respect for John. First of all, Jesus is no dummy. He knows he would be taking a completely unnecessary risk if he simply replied, "Yes, that's me, I'm the one." Because Herod's people are always listening. And Herod was on high alert for any threat to his authority, just like his father Herod the Great before him. And also, Jesus knows that his actions speak for themselves. He is doing the things he said he would do ever since his infamous first sermon in the little synagogue in his hometown of Nazareth where the people ran him out of town. He doesn't need to tell John who he is because he is showing him. Everything he's doing, everything he's teaching, everyone he's reaching, that's who he is. And that is the kind of Messiah he will be. As much as that might confound people like John, like the Pharisees, like anyone else who wants to see a Messiah that will bring political and military victory for these people who have been so oppressed and so abused for so long. Well, after John's disciples leave, Jesus knows the crowd probably has some questions. It's hard for us today to understand what a big deal John the Baptist was back then, and Luke had to address this in his gospel because people were still talking about him. There was a time when people found John so compelling that even after he died, a number of his disciples still called themselves his followers. Remember that John, before he was locked up, lived in the wilderness, which is not an easy place to be. And yet, people flocked to see him. He didn't travel around like Jesus did. Jesus went to the people. The people came to John. He was rock star popular. Jesus says, "What did you go out, to the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind?" I learned this week that when Jesus used this phrase, people instantly knew what he was talking about. They knew that he was asking if they were looking for a new king, because the image Herod chose for the coins that were in circulation at that time was the image of a Galilean reed, symbolizing the beauty and fertility of that region. And back in those days, there weren't a lot of images out in the world, period. So the image on a coin really stuck with you. If you want to meet someone who looks and dresses like a king, says Jesus, check the palaces. If you want to see a prophet, you got even more than you bargained for, because John was not just any prophet, he was the advanced guard for the king, for God, God's self. Jesus really honors John the way he's talking about him. And yet he's clear something new is happening. Instead of getting ready for the Lord to come, the Lord is here, right now. Not that Jesus is interested in ranking people at all, but the lowliest nobody in this new movement Jesus has started is greater than the greatest human being ever born up to this time. And the kingdom is a movement, a way of life, not an institution. The tragedy is when people are right there looking at the kingdom unfolding in front of them in what Jesus is doing, and yet they can't see it, and they won't be a part of it. He's talking to religious professionals again, the stubborn Pharisees and the lawyers who wouldn't let themselves be baptized by John, who cannot recognize the Messiah that's standing right in front of them. They were suspicious of John for his austere lifestyle and just as critical of Jesus for his celebratory one. What's it going to take to make these guys happy? That is why Jesus throws out an old riddle about children in the marketplace. We played the flute for you and you didn't dance. We wailed and you did not weep. Then Jesus comes full circle, back to where he started. Wisdom is vindicated by all her children. In other words, the truth of what John has prepared for and what Jesus is now demonstrating will eventually be clear. We might say today, time will tell, or the proof is in the pudding, or whatever we would say like that. There's a famous quote by Maya Angelou that you've probably heard before. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And this is great advice when you're starting a relationship and you see these little red flags, but you make all these excuses for why the person is behaving this way because there's chemistry. And then the relationship ends up crashing to the ground, and you end up with some pretty big burn marks, all because you didn't believe them when they showed you who they were. The deep truth behind that quote, of course, is we know who people are by what they do. The old cliche, actions speak louder than words, and integrity is when words and actions back each other up. Jesus showed us who he was. The question for us today as individuals and as a church is, how are we doing at showing the world today who Jesus is? Do people see Jesus in the way we treat them, in the way we do our work, in the way we talk, in the way we share our resources? Is my life, our life, contributing to helping blind people see and helping lame people to walk? Does my presence, does our presence add to the healing of the world or make it worse? How do our actions affect people living in poverty? Do they help or do they hurt? And how well do the words we speak and the things we do line up with what we say we believe? In every age, no matter who is running the government, no matter how big or small our place in society might be, it is the church's job. It is our calling as disciples to keep showing the world who Christ is. As Madeleine L'Engle, another beloved author, once said, "We draw people to Christ not by loudly discrediting what they believe, by telling them how wrong they are and how right we are, but by showing them a light that is so lovely that they want with all their hearts to know the source of it." We are wisdom's children today. When things feel dark, what a gift, what a hopeful thing that our calling is to be people who show the world the light of Christ. Amen.